I remember the exact moment I decided to buy a house. It was a Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside it, doing the thing I had started doing every few months since I was 24, checking my savings account balance and doing the mental math. Rent subtracted, car payment, student loans, nearly gone now, 2 more years, groceries. The small, disciplined life I had built expense by expense since I had moved out at 22 with a duffel bag and a used mattress, and the absolute conviction that I was done being financially adjacent to my family's chaos. The number in the savings account was $34,000. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened a new tab and searched. First-time homebuyer program, Seattle. I had been a project manager for 4 years at a logistics firm that was not glamorous but was stable, which was the thing I had decided to optimize for early in my career, stability. The thing that had been most absent from the first 18 years of my life. I made $72,000 a year. I had a 401k with a company match that I maxed every year. I had an emergency fund that was, for the first time, actually large enough to constitute an emergency fund rather than a fund for medium-sized inconveniences. I had, in the language my therapist used, built a regulated life. The coffee went cold. I didn't care. I was going to buy a house. His name was Daniel. We had been together for 3 years and engaged for 7 months, and we operated, as couples do when things are genuinely working, with the kind of ease that you only recognize in retrospect as rare. He was a high school biology teacher who coached soccer and made elaborate weekend breakfasts, and had the particular quality of steadiness that I understood, been specifically drawn to because I had grown up around its opposite. He was the one who said, that Tuesday night, that we should just schedule the mortgage appointment. You keep running the numbers, he said. You've been running them for 8 months. The numbers work, just make the appointment. What if they don't work on paper the same way they work in my head? That's what the appointment is for, he said. To find out. I made the appointment. It was 3 weeks out. I marked it in my calendar with a small house emoji, which was embarrassing but which Daniel found endearing. And for the next 3 weeks I did the thing I did when something important was coming. I prepared. I gathered documents. Pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements. I printed everything and put it in a folder and labeled the folder with the name of the bank and the date, and felt, doing so, the specific satisfaction of a person who has learned that preparation is the closest thing to control that life actually offers. I was 28 years old. I had done everything right. That was what I kept thinking in the weeks before the appointment. I had done everything right, not because I needed the validation, or not only because of that, but because doing everything right had required something. It had required the decision, at 18, to leave, the years of discipline, the choices, made again and again, to prioritize my own future over the various claims my family had made on it. I had done everything right. I would remember that thought later, in the bank manager's office, and it would have a different quality. The bank was a branch on a tree-lined street in Capitol Hill, the kind of bank that still had a lobby with chairs and a human being at a reception desk. The mortgage officer's name was Mark Ellison. He was in his 40s, professional, the kind of man who had done this appointment thousands of times and had developed the particular neutral competence of someone who has seen enough that very little surprises him. He looked at my documents. He typed things into his computer. He asked standard questions about employment history, about the down payment, about the property type we were considering. Everything was normal until it wasn't. He had been looking at his screen for a moment longer than the previous pauses. His expression, which had been professionally pleasant, had acquired a quality I couldn't immediately name, a slight tightening, a recalibration. He looked up. Ms. Parker, he said, I want to ask you something before we go further, and I want you to know this is a standard question we ask in certain circumstances. He paused. Are you aware of the $87,000 of debt currently attached to your name? I heard the question. I processed the question. Then I laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short, involuntary sound. The sound you make when someone says something that is clearly a mistake that will be quickly corrected. I'm sorry, I said. Can you say that again? He said it again. The same number. The same question. The same expression that was not the expression of a man who had made a mistake. That's not possible, I said. I have my credit report right here. I pulled it before I came in and it shows. I opened my folder, found the printout, looked at it. It showed what it had always shown. Good payment history, student loan in good standing, one credit card with a low balance, no derogatory marks. I handed it to him. He looked at it. He looked at his screen. He turned the monitor slightly toward me. "This is what we're seeing on our end," he said. I looked at the screen. I didn't recognize what I was seeing. Not because it was confusing, it was clear. A credit report, the same format as mine, with my name and my social security number at the top. But the accounts listed beneath were not mine. Collections accounts, late payment records, credit cards I had never opened. A personal loan from 6 years ago, a department store card, a gas card, balances that had been accumulating, some of them, for nearly a decade. "This is wrong," I said. "That's possible," Mark said carefully. "Identity theft is more common than most people realize. We see this situation from time to time. What I'd recommend is..." "No, I mean..." I looked at the screen again. At my name, my social security number, the address on the oldest account. I read the address. Then I read it again. 14 Birchwood Lane, Millhaven, Ohio. I had not lived at that address in 10 years. It was my parents' house. I did not call them that day. I don't know exactly why. Some instinct, some version of the self-preservation mechanism that had been developing in me since adolescence, said, "Wait, get more information. Don't call until you understand what you're looking at." Daniel drove home. I sat in the passenger seat with the folder in my lap and the printed credit report in my hands, and I looked at the address and thought about all the reasons a person's debt could be connected to their parents' address. Normal reasons, administrative reasons, an old account from before I moved out, one I'd forgotten about, one that had somehow. I couldn't finish the sentence. The accounts I'd seen on Mark's screen had opening dates. I had seen them in my peripheral vision, too stunned to take them in fully, but I had seen them. The oldest one was from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I had just turned 18. I was quiet the whole drive home. Daniel knew not to press. That was one of the things about him. He understood the difference between giving someone space to think and abandoning them to their thoughts. And he navigated that difference with an accuracy I was still, after 3 years, occasionally surprised by. At home, I opened my laptop. I pulled my full credit report. Not the summary I'd printed for the appointment. The full report, all 3 bureaus, the version that took 20 minutes to request and was 30 pages long. I read it, every page. What I found was this: 2 separate credit files. One was the file I knew, the one I had spent 6 years carefully building, the student loan and the 1 credit card and the on-time payment record. This was the file I had access to through the standard monitoring services, the one that had always shown what I expected it to show. The second file existed underneath it, attached to the same social security number, surfacing only when a lender ran a full hard inquiry rather than the soft check the monitoring services used. This was the file Mark had seen. 8 accounts. Total outstanding balance, $87,340. Oldest account, opened 10 years ago. Address on all accounts, 14 Birchwood Lane, Millhaven, Ohio. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought, there is an explanation for this that doesn't mean what it looks like it means. I tried to find one. The next week, I called creditors. I did this methodically, the way I did everything at work, systematically, with a spreadsheet, 1 account per morning before my actual workday started. I had Daniel make me coffee, and I sat at the kitchen table with my headphones and my notes, and I called the numbers on the credit report one by one. The process was slower than I'd hoped. Fraud departments have protocols. Identity theft claims require documentation. I was told to submit requests in writing, to allow processing times of 7 to 10 business days, to expect delays. I submitted the requests. I waited. The first documents arrived by the end of the second week. Account records, application information, the forms that had been submitted when the accounts were opened, scanned and sent as PDF attachments. I opened the first one. The application information was filled out in handwriting I didn't immediately recognize, but which had a quality that was familiar in the way that things can be familiar before you consciously identify them. A tilt of the letters, a particular formation of the lowercase g, my name, my social security number, my date of birth, a phone number I didn't recognize, and in the field for emergency contact, Susan Parker, relationship, mother. I looked at that line for a very long time. Outside the window, the Seattle morning went about its business. The particular gray-green light of the Pacific Northwest in October, the sound of a neighbor's car starting, a bird somewhere in the birch tree by the fence. I looked at my mother's name on a credit application submitted in my name. I thought, this is not what it looks like. I said that to myself very specifically, very deliberately. The way you say something when you are aware that what you are actually doing is giving yourself time to adjust to the fact that it is exactly what it looks like. I opened the second document. The application date on the account was 2 months after my 18th birthday. I closed the laptop. I sat in the kitchen. My phone was on the table. My mother's number was in it, the way it had always been, the way it would be in any phone listed under Mom, with the contact photo I'd set 4 years ago that I'd never updated, a picture of her at Christmas, smiling. I looked at the photo. I thought about calling. I thought about the application date, 2 months after my 18th birthday. I thought about who has access to a social security number the day. A person turns 18. The person who applied for that number on their behalf. The person who has been holding it, in whatever drawer or file or wallet, for 18 years. I put the phone face down on the table. I wasn't ready yet. I needed to know more before I called. I needed to know everything before I called, because I understood, with the part of me that had grown up in my parents' house and learned its particular dynamics, that if I called without full information, the information would be managed, the story would be shaped, and by the time I knew the truth, I would be holding a version of it that had been edited for my consumption. I was not going to let that happen. I opened the laptop. I opened the next document. I drove to Millhaven on a Saturday. I didn't tell them I was coming. That was deliberate. My mother had a specific talent for preparation, for arranging the emotional landscape of a room before anyone else entered it, for having the right expression ready, the right version of events assembled. I had grown up watching her do this and had understood it, for most of my life, as competence, as management, as the particular skill of a woman who held a family together through sheer organizational force. I understood now that there was another word for it. I had 12 documents in a folder on the passenger seat. Account records, application forms, payment histories. Every piece of paper I had received in the past 2 weeks, organized chronologically, with the totals highlighted in yellow. I drove the 4 hours from Seattle to Millhaven on a gray October Saturday with the radio off, and thought about what I was going to say. By the time I pulled into the driveway of 14 Birchwood Lane, I had decided I wasn't going to say anything first. I was going to let her. My mother answered the door with the expression she used for surprises. Bright, slightly performative, the warmth of a person who is good at warmth and knows it. Emma, she opened the door wider. Why didn't you call? I would have made something. I was in the area, I said. This was obviously untrue. Millhaven was not a place you were in the area of, but she let it pass the way she let most things pass when the alternative was confrontation. My father was in the living room. He stood when I came in, a gesture that struck me, for some reason, as guilty. People don't usually stand when their daughter walks into the room. They stand when they've been waiting for something. Emma, he said, good to see you. Hi, Dad. My mother had gone to the kitchen. I could hear her moving around, the particular efficiency of a woman finding something to do with her hands when the situation calls for it. I sat down. My father sat down. How's Daniel? He asked. He's fine, I said. Dad, I need to talk to both of you. He looked toward the kitchen. Susan, he called. His voice had a quality I recognized from childhood, the specific tone he used when something was happening that he wanted to be over quickly. My mother came in with 2 glasses of water she hadn't been asked for, which was her version of establishing the terms of an interaction before it started. I am the host here. This is my house. I am providing for you. She sat down across from me. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice was warm. The warmth of someone who has decided, preemptively, that whatever is coming is something she can absorb on her terms. I opened the folder. I put the first document on the coffee table. "Can you tell me about this account?" I said. She looked at it. Something moved across her face, brief, controlled, quickly managed. "What account is this?" "It's a credit card opened in my name in 2014, I said. 2 months after my 18th birthday. The emergency contact on the application is your name and phone number." A pause. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. The words were clear and immediate and had the quality of something rehearsed, not because she had known I was coming, but because she had known, on some level, that this conversation existed somewhere in the future and had prepared for it. "Mom," I said, "I genuinely don't know what account this is," she said. "There must be some kind of. Your name is on the application," I said. "Your phone number, the billing address is this house. Emma, identity theft happens all the time. Someone must have the handwriting on the application," I said. "I'd like you to look at it." I put the second document on the table. She looked at it. She looked at it for longer than a person looks at something they don't recognize. My father was looking at his hands. "Mom," I said, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here because I went to apply for a mortgage and found $87,000 of debt under my name, and I need to understand what happened." The silence lasted approximately 15 seconds. Then my mother said, "It was just one card." It was not just one card. I had known this before I drove to Millhaven. I had the documents. But there is a difference between knowing something from paper and hearing it unfold in real time, in the living room where you grew up, from the person who taught you what trust meant. She admitted the first card, her version, an emergency, a few years ago. Tyler had needed something. She was vague about what. She was always vague about what Tyler needed. The specifics of his needs had always been treated as a private matter between them, and they had been short on cash. And she had just used Emma's information because Emma had good credit even then, even at 18, and they had fully intended to pay it off. "Why didn't you ask me?" I said. "You would have said no," she said. She said it simply, without apparent awareness of what she was admitting. "You would have said no, so we didn't ask." I looked at my father. He was still looking at his hands. "How much is on that card?" I asked. "It was paid down quite a bit," she said. "It's not. How much?" A pause. $4,200. I put the next document on the table. "What about this one?" She looked at it. The brightness had gone out of her face now. What was there instead was the expression I had seen only a few times in my life, the one she wore when a situation had moved beyond the range of her management, when she was simply in it rather than directing it. "That was different," she said. "How was it different?" "We needed it for the roof. We were going to." "When was this one opened?" She looked at the date. "I don't remember exactly." 2016, I said. "Balance at collection, $11,800. She said nothing. I put the next document on the table, and the next, and the next. By the time I had put all 12 documents on the coffee table between us, my mother had gone very still in the particular way of someone who has run out of versions of the story and is now simply sitting inside the truth of it. 8 accounts, 3 credit cards, 2 store accounts, a personal loan, a gas card, a furniture financing account. Total, $87,340. I had highlighted the total on the summary sheet. I put it on top of the pile. "I need you to tell me," I said, "all of it from the beginning." The story came out in pieces. Not because she was trying to conceal it anymore. I think, by that point, she understood that the concealment was finished, but because the story was itself assembled in pieces. No single decision, an accumulation. One account opened, then another when the first was maxed. A loan when the accounts weren't enough. A store card for one specific purchase that had grown into a rolling balance. It had started, she said, when Tyler was 19. My brother was 3 years older than me and had been, his entire life, the subject of a specific parental attention that I had understood as a child without having language for it. He was the one things happened to. He was the one situations developed around. He was the one my parents arranged themselves in response to. the gravitational center of the family's practical and emotional resources. He was also, by 19, in trouble. Not dramatic trouble, not the kind that makes news. The ordinary trouble of a young man who has grown up understanding that consequences have a way of being absorbed by people around him. A car accident, his fault, uninsured. A semester of college paid for, and then lost to failing grades and a refund that somehow didn't materialize. A bar tab that became a debt that became a situation that required resolution. My parents resolved it. They had always resolved it. The first time they used my information, I had just turned 18. They had, I understood now, been waiting for that birthday the way you wait for a resource to become available. I had good credit even then. I had opened a secured card at 17 with money from a part-time job and had paid it on time every month because I had learned, living in that house, that my financial future was something I needed to build very carefully and entirely on my own. They had watched me do this, and then they had used it. We always meant to pay it back, my mother said, for the second time. You said that, I said. Emma, over 10 years, I said. 8 accounts, $87,000. At what point in 10 years did paying it back stop being something you were going to do and become something you were telling yourself you would do someday? She looked at me. That's not fair, she said. The words landed in the room, and I looked at them and thought about fairness. About what that word meant in this context, in this living room, between these people. Okay, I said. I picked up my folder. I stood up. Emma, my mother's voice shifted. Where are you going? We're talking. I have what I needed, I said. You can't just. She stood too. Emma, we are your family. We made mistakes, yes, but we are your family and you cannot just. Where did the money go? I said. She stopped. Specifically, I said. I want to know what it was spent on. A long pause. My father had not spoken in 40 minutes. He sat in his chair with his hands in his lap, and the expression of a man who has decided, long ago, that the cost of intervening in his wife's decisions was higher than the cost of watching them happen. Different things, my mother said. Tyler's tuition, I said. The car, the bail was that. That was one time, she said. And it was. Was there bail? I said. She was quiet. Was there bail, Mom? It was handled, she said. I picked up my bag. Emma. She followed me to the door. You don't understand how hard it was. Tyler needed, we didn't have, you were doing so well, you were always so responsible, and we just needed. I turned around. You needed, I said, so you took. She opened her mouth, without asking, without telling me, for 10 years. I looked at her, at the face I had known my whole life, the face I had been reading since before I had words for reading. And when I came in today, the first thing you said was that it was just one car. She didn't say anything. I'll be in touch, I said. I walked to the car. I drove 3 blocks, pulled over and sat for a while. I was not crying. I noticed that with some surprise. I had expected to cry, had braced for it on the drive down, had prepared for the specific kind of grief that comes when something you hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly what you feared. What I felt instead was something quieter and more absolute, not shock. I had moved through shock in the 2 weeks of document review, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning, with the account records spread around me. What I felt now was the particular exhaustion of someone who has finished the part of the process where you're still hoping you're wrong. I was not wrong. I drove back to Seattle. Tyler called that night. I almost didn't answer. Then I did, because I had questions that my mother had not answered, and I understood that Tyler, unlike my mother, might tell me the truth not from honesty, but from the specific confidence of someone who has never believed consequences would reach him personally. Hey, he said. The easy greeting of a man who has been told to call and is calling, but has not been told why. Hey, I said. Mom says you came by. I did. A pause. She seemed upset. Probably, I said. Tyler, I want to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me. Sure. Did you know? A silence. It was the silence I had wanted. Not the silence of someone who doesn't understand the question. The silence of someone who does. Know what specifically, he said. That they were using my credit. Another pause, shorter this time. He was making a calculation. I could almost feel it through the phone, the particular arithmetic of a person deciding how much acknowledging is safe. I knew they were handling some stuff, he said. I didn't know the details. You didn't ask about the details. It wasn't my thing to. Tyler, I kept my voice level. The bail money, the tuition for the semester you dropped out of, the car payments for the accord you totaled in 2018. Was it your thing to use those? A very long silence. They offered, he said finally. His voice had shifted, not defensive, exactly. More confused. The confusion of someone who genuinely does not understand why the thing being described is a problem. I didn't ask them to use your. I didn't know they were using your. I thought they had savings or something. They didn't have savings, I said. They had my social security number. He was quiet. And they've had it since the day I turned 18, I said. And they used it for 10 years. And the result is that I have $87,000 of debt under my name that I didn't accumulate and wasn't told about. And I just found out because I tried to buy a house and was rejected. A silence. That's messed up, he said. Yes, I said. I didn't know the specifics, he said again. He said it as though the specifics were what mattered, as though not knowing the mechanism absolved him of the outcome it had funded. Okay, I said. What are you going to do? He asked. I thought about it. I don't know yet, I said. That was not quite true, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not to him. My parents called 4 times in the following week. My mother called twice, once to explain, once to apologize in the specific way she apologized, which was to describe the apology rather than to give it. She said, I know I should say I'm sorry, and I am, but I also need you to understand how difficult things were. She said, you were always the strong one, Emma. You always handled everything. We just needed you to handle this too. You always handled everything. We just needed you to handle this too. I had not been asked. I had not been told. I had not been given the opportunity to handle it or to refuse to handle it. My identity had been taken and used, and the debt attached to it had been quietly accumulating for a decade. And now that the accumulation was visible, my mother was describing it as a thing I had handled. I did not call back. My father called once. He said, Emma, please, your mother is very upset, which was the entirety of what my father had been able to offer for as long as I could remember. The information that my mother was very upset, as though her being upset were both the problem and the resolution of the problem, as though everything else were simply context. Tyler called once. He wanted to know if I was coming for Thanksgiving. I put the phone down and looked at it for a moment. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Rebecca Ockeffer. She was a consumer rights attorney who specialized in identity theft and credit fraud. Daniel had found her. He had spent 3 evenings on his laptop, while I sat beside him not quite able to look at the screen. And he had compiled a list and made calls and narrowed it to 2 names and presented them to me with the particular gentleness of someone who understands that the person they love is in the middle of something and needs the logistics handled. I had chosen Rebecca based on the first 5 minutes of our initial call. She was direct. She did not soften things unnecessarily. She told me what I was looking at: financial fraud, potentially identity theft under the statute, civil liability. She told me what my options were. She told me what each option would cost, financially, temporally, relationally. If you file a fraud report, she said, the accounts will be flagged. Your parents will be contacted by the creditors. There may be a criminal referral depending on what the investigation finds. It will not be possible to keep this quiet. I understand, I said. Family members tend to react, she said. Extended family, siblings, there can be significant social pressure. I understand, I said again. I want to make sure, Rebecca said, because I've had clients who began this process and then reversed course under family pressure. And reversing course is significantly more complicated than not beginning. Are you certain? I thought about the mortgage appointment, about Mark Ellison's face when he turned the monitor toward me, about $87,340 and 8 accounts, and an emergency contact that said Susan Parker. Relationship. Mother. Yes, I said. Then let's start with the fraud reports. The fraud reports went to all 3 credit bureaus, to each of the 8 creditors individually, and to the Federal Trade Commission. I filed a police report with the Millhaven Police Department, which required a phone call and a form, and a conversation with an officer who was professionally sympathetic. and explained that the investigation timeline would depend on available resources, but that the report would be on record. Rebecca handled the creditor disputes. I handled the paperwork she gave me and signed what she told me to sign and called the numbers she told me to call. It was a large amount of administrative work. I did all of it at my kitchen table in the early mornings, before work, with coffee and my headphones and the systematic focus of someone who has learned that the only way through a large, complicated problem is one piece at a time. My mother found out about the fraud reports on a Thursday. She found out because a creditor contacted her as the listed emergency contact, and the creditor told her the account had been flagged for fraud, and my mother called me 7 times in 4 hours. I did not answer. She left 3 voicemails. The first was confused. The second was hurt. The third was angry, genuinely angry. The kind of anger that strips away the management and the warmth and the arranged expressions and leaves something rawer underneath. She said, "I cannot believe you would do this to your own family." She said, "We made a mistake, yes, but this is an overreaction. This is you being dramatic. This is you always making things harder than they have to be." She said, "Your brother is going to be affected by this. Do you understand that? Your father and I are going to be affected by this. This is going to hurt everyone." I listened to the voicemails. I noted that hurt everyone did not include me. I didn't call back. The extended family, mobilized within 2 weeks. I had expected this in the abstract. Rebecca had warned me, but the abstract and the specific are different things, and the specific was. My aunt called to tell me I was destroying the family. My cousin sent a text that said you really couldn't just talk to them. My grandmother, who was 81 and had never once been involved in anything financial, left a voicemail that someone had clearly helped her compose about the importance of family and forgiveness and how these things should be kept private. Private. The debt had been accumulated privately. The fraud had been committed privately. The 10 years of using my identity had been private. Now that I had named it, I was the one disrupting privacy. I did not respond to any of them. Daniel took my phone one evening and held it with both hands and said, "Do you want me to respond to some of these?" "No," I said. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not tonight," I said. He made dinner. He put on a film I'd mentioned wanting to see. He sat beside me on the couch and didn't press and understood, as he usually understood, what the situation called for. I was lucky. I knew that. I was in the middle of something genuinely difficult and I was not in it alone. And I knew, in the way you know things that you need to hold on to, that this mattered enormously. Tyler called in the second week. He had heard about the fraud reports. His voice had lost the easy neutrality of the first call. There was something else in it now, something he was not accustomed to, which I identified after a moment as discomfort. "The creditors are contacting Mom and Dad," he said. "I know," I said. "They might have to pay some of this back." "Yes," I said. "That's how debt works." "Emma." "Tyler," I said. "I'm not angry at you specifically. I want you to understand that. But I'm also not going to protect the people who did this from the consequences of having done it." A silence. "I need some help," he said. I waited. "There's a thing with my car," he said. "I'm a little behind on payments, and I was wondering if you could." I took a breath. "No," I said. A pause. Not a long one. He wasn't devastated by it, which told me everything. He was surprised. That was the extent of it. In 28 years, the word no had not been in my vocabulary where Tyler was concerned, and so its arrival now registered not as a wall but as an anomaly, something that didn't compute. "Okay," he said slowly. "Is this because of the—" "It's because the answer is no," I said. "It's not about the rest of it. The answer is just no." Another pause. "Okay," he said again. We hung up. I sat in the kitchen. I thought about the first time Tyler had borrowed money from me. I had been 22. He had been 25. I had said yes immediately, without asking what it was for, because he was my brother and he needed something, and I was the one who was good at having things together, and so I was the one who was asked. I thought about every time since then. I thought about what it costs to be the person who always has it together, who always says yes, who always manages it, who always absorbs what would otherwise be someone else's consequence. I thought about $87,000. I thought about the mortgage application on Mark Ellison's desk. I thought about the house with the small house emoji in my calendar that was not happening this year, or next year, or the year after, realistically. Not with the credit repair timeline Rebecca had given me. Not with the higher interest rates I'd face even after the disputed accounts were resolved. Not with everything that had been quietly accumulated in my name over the decade I'd spent building toward this. The house was not a house anymore. It was a calculation. It was years. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. I started a spreadsheet. This was what I did when I needed to understand the actual shape of a problem. I put it in numbers. I listed what the damage was, what the repair would cost, what the timeline looked like, what I could control and what I couldn't. Column 1, the accounts, the balances, the dispute status. Column 2, the projected resolution dates. Column 3, the credit score impact by quarter. Column 4, the revised mortgage timeline. The number at the bottom of column 4 was 3 years. 3 years, conservatively, before my credit profile would support the mortgage terms I needed for a house in my budget. I looked at that number. I thought about 3 years of dinners at my kitchen table with the money I was putting toward someone else's debt. 3 years of watching the housing market while I waited for my own name to become mine again. 3 years of being 28, 29, 30, 31, paying the price of a decade of decisions I had never made. I thought about my mother's voice on the voicemail. This is going to hurt everyone. I thought about how, in 10 years of hurting me, no one had said a word. I closed the spreadsheet. I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. The creditor negotiations took 8 months. Some of the accounts were straightforward. The fraud documentation was clear. The accounts were closed. The balances were removed from my credit file. Others were more complicated. 2 creditors disputed the fraud claim, which required additional documentation, additional rounds with Rebecca, additional waiting. One account went through a secondary review that added 3 months to the process. During those 8 months, I went to work every day. I made my actual credit card payments. The one card, my card, the one I had chosen and opened, on time every month. I did not open any new accounts. I did not apply for anything. I kept my head down and managed the process and did not call my family and did not respond to the periodic texts that arrived from various relatives suggesting various versions of reconciliation. Reconciliation, in their usage, meant come back to the arrangement. Stop making this difficult. Absorb the consequences of what was done to you so that the people who did it don't have to absorb them. I was not interested in that version of reconciliation. My parents had lost, with the fraud reports and the creditor disputes, their ability to manage Tyler's situations the way they always had. The specific infrastructure of rescue, the quiet assumption of his debt, the absorption of his consequences, had depended on access to resources they could use without accountability. That access was gone now. Not because I had taken it away, but because I had simply stopped looking away from the fact of it. Tyler lost the car. He had not, it turned out, been slightly behind on payments. He had been 4 months behind. Without the family mechanism operating, the car was repossessed. He moved in with a friend. He found a job, a real one, full-time, the first in several years. These things happened not because anyone planned them, but because the space that had always been filled by rescue was empty, and nature, even human nature, fills empty space. My mother called less as the months passed. The calls that did come were shorter. The warmth had a different quality, less performed, more tentative. She was a woman learning, at 63, that a dynamic she had relied on for decades had changed, and the learning was not comfortable for her, and I had enough residual compassion for her to understand that without letting the compassion reverse what I had decided. My father sent a card in the spring. A plain card, no occasion, with a brief note in his handwriting. I know I should have done more. I hope you're okay. I read it many times. I did not respond right away, but I did not throw it away. 3 years. It was almost exactly 3 years. 3 years and 2 months from the date of that first mortgage appointment. The one with the small house emoji and the printouts in the folder, and the cup of coffee I'd left on my kitchen table. When Rebecca called to tell me the last disputed account had been officially resolved and removed from my credit file. Your credit score as of this morning, she said, is 741. I was at my desk at work. I stood up for no particular reason. 741, I said. That's a strong number for a first-time buyer, she said. You'll want to check with your mortgage officer about current rates, but you should have good options. I thanked her. I sat back down. I opened my calendar and looked at the entry that was still there, because I had never deleted it. The mortgage appointment from 3 years ago. The small house emoji. I deleted the entry. I made a new one. The mortgage appointment was on a Tuesday in December. Different bank, different officer. A woman named Priya who had a calm, efficient warmth that I appreciated. The folder of documents was larger now. 3 years more of pay stubs and tax returns. 3 years more of the careful financial life I had continued building through all of it. She looked at the documents. She typed things. She asked standard questions. She did not look up with an expression of concerned recalibration. She said, "Your file looks good. Let's talk about what you're looking for." I found the house in February. It was not the house I had imagined 3 years ago, which had been a slightly vague concept. House, yard, space, mine, rather than a specific thing. This was specific. A 1940s craftsman in a neighborhood I had started walking through on weekends. 3 bedrooms, which was more than I needed, but which felt. Standing in the third one with the afternoon light coming through the window, like something to grow into rather than something excessive. A yard that was mostly grass, and one large apple tree that had obviously been there a long time. The inspection came back clean, which my inspector said was unusual for a house this age, and which I took as the kind of sign that rational people don't believe in, but that feel meaningful anyway. I made an offer. It was accepted. The closing was on a morning in March. Daniel was there. He sat beside me at the table, and I signed the documents that Rebecca had reviewed. There were a great many of them, which nobody tells you, the sheer physical volume of buying a house. And when the last page was signed, the escrow officer pushed a small envelope across the table. Keys. 2 of them on a plain ring. I picked them up. They were lighter than I expected. I went to the house alone that afternoon. Daniel had offered to come. I had said, "Give me an hour." He had said okay in the way he said okay to things that required no explanation. I drove to the house, my house, and sat in the car for a moment in front of it. The afternoon light was doing something particular with the craftsman facade, the way afternoon light in March does particular things with old wood. The apple tree in the yard was still bare, but had the quality of something about to. I went inside. I walked through the rooms slowly. The way you walk through something you are beginning to understand is real. The living room, the kitchen, the room off the kitchen that I thought might be an office, the hallway to the bedrooms. Everything was empty. Everything smelled like old wood and cleaning solution and potential. I stood in the kitchen. The windows faced west, and the afternoon light came through them at the angle it would always come through them. In this house, in this direction, at this time of year. In a few months, I would know what summer light looked like in here. In a few years, I would know what all the seasons looked like. I put the keys on the counter. I stood in the kitchen. I was 31 years old, and I owned this room and everything around it. Owned it with my name and my credit and my 3 years of early mornings and spreadsheets and phone calls, and the decision, made in a living room in Millhaven on an October Saturday, to stop absorbing consequences that were not mine. My phone vibrated on the counter. I looked at it. Mom. I looked at the screen, at her name, at the contact photo I had finally updated a year ago, a different photo, a recent one, at a family event I had attended with careful, limited presence. Her face, older than I sometimes remembered it, looking at the camera with the expression she had when she wasn't performing for anyone. I thought about the voicemail. This is going to hurt everyone. I thought about the keys on the counter. I let it ring. Then I picked up the phone and placed it face down on the counter. And I went to the car and brought in the first box. And I started unpacking. My parents spent 10 years borrowing my identity to build my brother's future. It took me 3 years to get my name back. I want to be careful about how I describe what I recovered, because I think the easy version of this story is about credit scores and mortgage approvals and the concrete, countable things that were damaged and then repaired. Those things were real. The damage was real. The repair was real. And I am not going to minimize either. But the thing I am most aware of, standing in the kitchen of this house with the March light coming through the windows, is not the credit score. It is the decision. The decision I made in my parents' living room. To stop being the person who absorbs things. To stop being strong in the way I had been strong my whole life, which was not strength at all, but the particular endurance of someone who has learned that their own limits will not be respected, and has therefore stopped acknowledging they exist. I had limits. They had always existed. I had simply never been allowed to name them. I am allowed to name them now. That is what I mean when I say I got my name back. Not just the credit file. The name. The one that was mine before anyone else decided they had a right to it. It was always mine. I just had to stop letting them use it.